When you think of Roy Rogers, the image that comes to mind is unmistakable. The white cowboy hat, the confident stance, the perfect smile, a man who seemed to have it all figured out. For generations, Roy Rogers was the king of the cowboys, a symbol of American strength and moral clarity. Children grew up watching his films, believing in the kind of hero he portrayed on screen. But like so many icons of Hollywood's golden age, the man behind the carefully constructed image was far more complex than the world ever knew. For decades, there was a story that Roy Rogers and his wife Dale Evans kept close to their hearts, something so deeply personal that it shaped the entire trajectory of their lives together. This was not a scandal in the traditional sense. It was something far more meaningful, a testament to who they were when nobody was watching, when the cameras were off and the studio lights had dimmed. Recently, members of the Rogers family have begun speaking openly about this pivotal moment in their lives, sharing details that offer us a rare glimpse into their private world. What they've revealed shows us that Roy Rogers was not just an actor playing a hero on screen. He was someone who made profoundly courageous choices in his personal life, choices that challenged the conventions of his time and ultimately changed how an entire nation thought about family, disability, and unconditional love. To understand this story fully, we need to go back to the beginning, to a time before Roy Rogers was a household name, before the fame, before the myth. We need to understand who Leonard Sly was before Hollywood gave him a new identity. Because the choices Roy Rogers made later in life, the values he lived by, were shaped by everything that came before: the struggle, the loss, the determination to succeed against impossible odds. This is the story of how a man from humble beginnings became not just a star, but a father who defied everything his era told him he should do. This is the story of Roy Rogers and the decision that his family is finally ready to fully share. Before there was Roy Rogers, there was Leonard Franklin Sly, born in 1911 in Cincinnati, Ohio, to a working-class family struggling to make ends meet. His childhood was far from the glamorous world he would later inhabit. There were no agents, no studio contracts, no carefully crafted public image. There was only the daily reality of a family doing everything they could just to survive. Leonard's father worked where he could find work, and his mother managed a household with limited resources. Money was always tight, and the idea of their son becoming a Hollywood star would have seemed absurd, even laughable, to those around them. But Leonard had something that no amount of poverty could take away: he had music. In the evenings, when the work of the day was done and the house grew quiet, music filled the spaces between struggle and hope. It was simple music, unpretentious and honest, the kind that didn't require expensive instruments or formal training. It was the music of working people, of people who sang because it helped them endure. As Leonard grew older, he carried that music with him. When the Great Depression swept across America, devastating families and destroying opportunities, Leonard Sly was among millions who found themselves displaced and desperate. Like countless others, he headed west toward California, searching for any work that might sustain him. He found himself in the San Joaquin Valley, working as a migrant fruit picker alongside other men and women just trying to survive. The days were long and grueling, the sun merciless, and the pay barely enough to eat. But in the evenings, around the labor camps, something remarkable happened. Leonard would pull out his guitar and begin to play. The other workers, exhausted and broken by the day's labor, would gather around. For a few precious hours, the guitar's voice became their voice. The songs he played spoke to their experiences, the struggle, the displacement, the small moments of beauty and connection that kept them going. Word spread. Leonard's music had a quality that people responded to, something authentic and deeply human. He began forming small musical groups, eventually becoming part of the Sons of the Pioneers, a group that would gain real recognition in the music industry. Their songs, particularly Tumbling Tumbleweeds, began to reach beyond the labor camps and into the broader culture. Hollywood noticed. The film industry was always searching for talent, for performers who could bring both music and personality to the screen. Leonard Sly had both. He was signed to Republic Pictures in 1937, and his transformation into Roy Rogers officially began. The studio gave him a new name, one calculated to appeal to audiences, one that carried echoes of Will Rogers, the beloved humorist and performer who had passed away just years before. With that new name came a new life, a new identity, and a carefully constructed public image designed to appeal to families and children. The humble fruit picker became the king of the cowboys, a symbol of everything wholesome and heroic that Depression-era America desperately wanted to believe in. Roy Rogers' career took off with remarkable speed. His films were enormously popular, his image was carefully cultivated, and his name became synonymous with the Western hero. But success in Hollywood came with a price that few people understood. The studio system was ruthless in its control over actors' lives and images. Every appearance mattered. Every word spoken in public was considered. The persona of Roy Rogers had to be flawless, consistent, and above all, safe. He was the man families wanted their children to admire. He was strength without aggression, confidence without arrogance, and heroism without complexity. But behind closed doors, Roy Rogers was living a life that the studios would never have allowed on screen. In 1936, before he became famous, Roy married a woman named Arlene, and they started building a family together. They had 2 children, Roy Jr., known as Dusty, and a daughter born shortly after. This was Roy's real life, the one that existed away from the cameras and the studio lights. For a time, there was some semblance of balance. He was building a career while trying to be present for his family, though the demands of Hollywood made this nearly impossible. Then came the moment that would change everything. In 1946, Arlene died suddenly after giving birth to their daughter. The loss was devastating and unexpected. Roy was left to care for 2 young children while still maintaining the image of the perfect Western hero. He was grieving privately while performing publicly, a split that took an enormous emotional toll. The pain of this loss created a void in his life that he struggled to fill. During this dark period, someone emerged who would understand both his public world and his private struggles. Dale Evans, an actress and performer who had her own complicated history with Hollywood, had been working alongside Roy in various films. They had developed a strong professional relationship that gradually deepened into something more personal. Dale understood the pressures of maintaining a public image while living a private reality. She had her own secrets, her own reasons for understanding the gap between who you appeared to be and who you truly were. Within a year of Arlene's death, Roy and Dale married on New Year's Eve in 1947. It was a quick union that raised eyebrows in Hollywood circles, where timing and appearances mattered greatly. But for Roy, it represented a chance at stability, at partnership with someone who understood the unique pressures of his world. For Dale, it was an opportunity to build something real with someone who saw her as she truly was. Together, they formed what appeared to the public as the perfect Hollywood couple, beautiful, talented, wholesome, and deeply in love. But like all carefully constructed public images, there was far more happening beneath the surface. As their marriage developed and their partnership deepened, both Roy and Dale were building something that went far beyond their film careers. They were building a family, and that family would soon be tested in ways that would reveal the true character of both of them. In 1950, Roy Rogers and Dale Evans welcomed their daughter, Robin Elizabeth Rogers. She was their only biological child together, and her arrival was celebrated as a joyful moment in their marriage. But very quickly, it became apparent that Robin had been born with Down syndrome. In the early 1950s, the medical establishment's understanding of Down syndrome was primitive at best. Doctors spoke in absolutes and certainties that we now know were based on ignorance rather than science. Children born with Down syndrome, they told parents, would never develop meaningful abilities. They would never communicate in ways that mattered. They would never contribute to society. The advice given to Roy and Dale was the same advice given to countless parents during that era: institutionalize her. Place her in a facility where she would be cared for by professionals. Get on with your lives. Forget about her. This was not presented as one option among many. It was presented as the inevitable, responsible choice. Doctors, who were seen as authorities and experts, spoke with confidence about what Robin's life would be, what she could never be, and what her existence would mean. Many families accepted this advice. They were frightened and confused, and they trusted the expertise they were being given. But Roy Rogers and Dale Evans made a different choice. They chose to bring Robin home. They chose to raise her within their family, to include her in their daily lives, and to treat her not as a medical problem to be hidden away but as their daughter. This decision was not made in isolation. It was made in direct contradiction to the advice of medical professionals. It was made in direct contradiction to the expectations of Hollywood. The studio system that had built Roy Rogers into an icon was concerned. An image of wholesomeness and perfection could be damaged by the public knowledge that their star had a child with a disability. There was a suggestion, pressure even, to keep Robin hidden, to exclude her from any public appearance, and to maintain the illusion of the perfect family. But Roy and Dale refused. They insisted that Robin appear in family photographs. They insisted that she be part of their public life. It was a quiet act of rebellion against the forces that had shaped their careers and defined their public existence. Inside their home, Robin was loved fiercely. She was not hidden away or treated as a burden. She was their daughter, and she was included in the daily rhythms of family life. For the brief time she was with them, Robin was surrounded by people who saw her not through the lens of medical diagnosis, but through the eyes of love. In 1952, at just under 2 years old, Robin became ill with complications related to mumps. She died suddenly, and the family was shattered. The loss of a child is devastating under any circumstances, but for Roy and Dale, this loss carried additional weight. It was compounded by the knowledge that they had chosen to love her fully, to include her completely, even when the world told them not to. Robin's death could have been a tragedy that they kept private, something they moved past and never discussed. Instead, it became something far more significant. After Robin's death, Dale Evans did something remarkable. She sat down and began to write. What she produced was a book called Angel Unaware, and it would become far more influential than anyone could have predicted. The book was not a medical treatise or a clinical account of Down syndrome. It was written from Robin's perspective, imagining her voice speaking from heaven, reflecting on her brief life and its meaning. It was deeply personal, vulnerable, and profoundly moving. When the book was published in 1953, just a year after Robin's death, it became a bestseller. Readers connected with it in ways that surprised everyone. Families who had been told to hide their children with disabilities, who had been made to feel ashamed, found in Dale's words a different perspective. They found validation. They found the idea that their children's lives had value and meaning, regardless of what society told them. The book helped shift something fundamental in American culture. It did not change medical practice overnight, and it did not eliminate the stigma surrounding disability. But it opened a door. It created space for a different kind of conversation about what it means to be a parent, about unconditional love, about the worth of every human life. Organizations dedicated to supporting children with developmental disabilities began to recognize Dale Evans' contribution. The Dale Rogers Training Center was eventually named in honor of her work and her legacy. Years later, when members of the Rogers family began speaking more openly about this period of their lives, they wanted the world to understand something specific. They wanted people to know that Roy Rogers and Dale Evans had not been perfect. They had faced the same fears that all parents face. They had been influenced by the voices of authority telling them what they should do. But they had made a choice based on love rather than fear, based on their values rather than on social convention. What the family has shared is a portrait of two people who, despite the pressures of fame and the limitations of their era, chose to do what they believed was right. They chose to love their daughter without reservation. They chose to include her in their family without shame. And when she was gone, they chose to transform their grief into something that would help countless other families. In the end, this is the hidden story that Roy Rogers' family wants you to know. It is not a scandal. It is not a secret shame. It is a testament to the kind of people they were when nobody was watching. It is proof that heroism is not just something that happens on a movie screen. Sometimes it happens in the quiet moments of a family's private life, when people choose love over fear, inclusion over hiding, and honesty over the carefully constructed image. That is the real Roy Rogers. That is the story his family is finally ready to share completely.